Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're unpacking a classic corporate drama today, how one of the world's most invincible tech giants suddenly found itself literally fighting for survival. I mean, it's a fascinating story, right? You have absolute industry dominance, sudden stagnation, and then these fierce, agile rivals who just seized the moment the second the giant blinked.
So you really have to ask, how did one of the world's biggest tech companies lose its lead? For decades, Intel didn't just participate in the computer industry, they practically ruled it. If you were talking about processing power, you were talking about Intel, period. But today, well, the landscape looks drastically different. Competitors like AMD and NVIDIA have severely challenged that once unshakable dominance, and they're fundamentally redefining where the industry is heading. How does a company with a nearly unlimited research budget and a massive multi-year head start end up playing catch-up? Let's trace this epic rise, fall, and attempted rebirth.
All right, let's start at the beginning with Section 1, the era of Intel Inside.
Going all the way back to their founding in 1968, Intel quickly established a staggering pace of innovation. Driven by founders like Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore, the namesake of Moore's Law, the company had an engineering culture that was just second to none. By the 1970s, they sparked the microprocessor revolution. They set the foundational x86 architecture standards that would literally define computing for half a century. They executed flawlessly on their famous tick-tock model, relentlessly shrinking process nodes one year, improving microarchitecture the next. But it was really the 1990s where their absolute dominance solidified with the Pentium processors. If you bought a PC back then, you weren't really shopping around for processors, you were just buying Intel. They'd essentially cornered the market on the CPU, the very brain of the computer. They weren't just building parts, they were building the foundation of the modern computing age, and their manufacturing lead, it felt completely insurmountable.
And that power was cemented by two simple words: Intel Inside. This became one of the most recognized marketing campaigns in history. It wasn't just an ad, it was an absolute seal of quality. Think about it, they achieved something incredible. They took a highly complex, invisible piece of silicon, hidden inside a boring beige plastic box, and made it the primary selling point for the consumer. By heavily subsidizing PC makers who slopped that little sticker on their machines, Intel basically commoditized the PC makers while making their own component the ultimate value driver. Their brand became completely synonymous with computing itself. That gave them the kind of pricing power and market share that most companies could only dream of.
But things change. Let's look at Section 2, warning signs and stagnation.
Now, as we've seen in so many historical cases, absolute dominance can breed complacency. A really stark contrast started to emerge between Intel's internal execution and what was actually happening out in the market. Internally, the friction was mounting big time. Being an integrated device manufacturer, meaning they design and manufacture their own chips, well, that used to be their biggest advantage. But they hit a massive wall with critical manufacturing delays. They struggled for years just trying to shrink their transistors down to the 10nm and 7nm nodes. That famous tick-tock cadence we just talked about, it completely broke down. This led to a dangerous period of slow innovation where they were essentially just rebranding older tech. But externally, the tech world was not waiting around. The market was rapidly accelerating. Dedicated foundries like TSMC in Taiwan were steadily mastering extreme ultraviolet lithography and actually passing Intel's manufacturing capabilities. Massive tech shifts were happening right as Intel was missing its own internal deadlines. I mean, they famously passed on making the chip for the original iPhone, totally missing the mobile revolution. The gap between what the market demanded and what Intel could deliver was widening fast, turning their biggest strength into a massive liability.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rise of competitors.
So, while Intel was stalling out, two very agile challengers were getting ready to strike. And they did it by shifting the battlefield entirely away from traditional PCs. Intel was basically caught guarding an old fortress. AMD, under some brilliant new leadership, struck right at Intel's core business. Instead of trying to build massive, expensive single chips, AMD innovated with a chiplet architecture for their Ryzen processors. This let them offer incredible multi-core performance and superior value that caught Intel completely off guard. Suddenly, the undisputed king of the CPU was bleeding market share. Meanwhile, NVIDIA was capturing explosive growth in entirely new sectors. They'd spent years leveraging the gaming revolution, perfecting parallel processing with their GPUs, graphics processing units. Well, as it turns out, the math required to render video game graphics perfectly maps onto the math needed for deep learning and neural networks. NVIDIA smartly positioned their GPUs and their CUDA software platform as the undisputed engines for modern AI. Because of this, they just took over the highly lucrative data center market. In a modern AI data center, the CPU, Intel's bread and butter, is basically relegated to being a traffic cop, while NVIDIA's GPUs do all the heavy lifting. The whole definition of a processor had changed practically overnight, and AMD and NVIDIA were the ones writing the new rules.
So what now? Here is Section 4, Intel's comeback strategy.
Facing this literal existential threat, Intel didn't just fold. They formulated a massive,